So, just a few days ago, Konami sued Cygames over patent infringement with regards to the game Uma Musume Pretty Derby to the tune of 4 billion Japanese yen, which is about 29 million US dollars for those who are interested. But what caused this to happen, and what do we know about the case so far? Hey Legal Eagles, it's time to think like a... it's time to think like a salaryman because I'm a game developer working in Japan, so let's talk about this from that angle, shall we? But lawsuits in the game industry aren't exactly anything all too uncommon. We have seen something similar with League of Legends suing Mobile Legends and PUBG suing many of the games that are like it. However, the big difference between these cases that we see in the West, usually they are big in profile, as compared to those in Japan is that unlike those in America where they go like, "Hey, yeah, you copy me, I sue you." In Japan, most of the cases instead revolve around patents and the infringement of said patents. But why is this such a common thing within Japan? Well, it's due to the reason that in Japan, filing patents over game systems is a lot more common. And by that, I mean that the industry in general is actually pushing out patents by the thousands every single year. So for comparison, let's use Ubisoft since it's a Western company. I know, not everyone likes Ubisoft. Shh. Not relevant to this comparison. But think about it this way. From the year 2001 to 2019, Ubisoft had obtained 44 patents, which you can laugh and say like, they don't make any good games. But hey, put that aside, think about it this way. They had 44, out of which at this point only 18 are still active. Within the year 2018 alone, Konami had filed and successfully obtained 208 patents. And this is followed by 94 in the year 2019, and in 2020 they actually obtained 165 more patents. So really running rounds around Ubisoft right now. And let's face it, Konami in this day and age, they aren't exactly the most innovative of companies either, but even then they're pushing out a lot more patents, and this is actually fairly common within Japan. As compared to Konami, Nintendo doesn't file nor obtain as many patents, but even then, they are still obtaining about 100 every single year. And this is culminating in what some people who work in Japan or who study the game industry in Japan might just call the patent wars as well. Because this isn't exactly uncommon. We have seen similar lawsuits happening in the past over patent infringement between Nintendo and Colopra, between Capcom and Koei Tecmo. As you can imagine, that makes working in the game industry in Japan quite an infuriating experience, because even if you think you have a good idea and you propose it to your boss and your boss thinks it's a good idea and your heart goes like, all it takes is for them to, in the next line, most likely say, yes, we have to speak to our lawyers about that. And then all your hope and optimism just goes like... As you can imagine, most people don't become game developers with the desire to become part-time lawyers as well. Well, except maybe the developers of Phoenix Wright and all, but aside from them, most people don't exactly do so, and as a result, they aren't exactly very willing to read through thousands of patent filings, each of which are multi-page, only to find out that these are still in the process of being filed and have not been accepted as well. If you work in a very big company like some of the ones I worked in before, they tend to have a very big database keeping track of all of this maintained by the company's lawyers, who would help you to scour through all of this whenever you propose a new system. But if you're not one of those companies, it tends to be a problem. So considering that the filing was only announced this week, most of the facts of the case aren't exactly out there yet, but it does seem that Cygames is willing to fight the case. And what we see is that, according to both sides at least, it seems like discussions have been going on behind the scenes to resolve this amicably beforehand, but that didn't result in anything, and that's why we are seeing a court case now. And as a result, most of the information out there right now is mostly still speculation, but there seems to be a general idea that the reason why Cygames might have ended in this situation is due to the fact that they are a company that, and this is something many people in the game industry in Japan also seem to be of the impression of, is that Cygames is the type of company that tends to put development first before finances, and this means that they tend to make something and then see if it can be applied. And when you couple this with the fact that only 10% of their company is full-time staff and 90% are there on some other form of contract, it might have been that they made this thing and it might have fallen through the cracks at some point in the communication web, and as a result it might have gotten out into the public, or, and this is what I think is more likely to be the case, they did know about the patent, but they did think that their product would be wholly different enough for it to stand and not be actually something that would get them sued by Konami instead. The thing with patents in the Japanese game industry is that they tend to be very, very specific. And what I mean by this is that you really need to patent everything right down to the general steps of what must be done. And it's only if these steps are specific enough and not wholly general enough that they can be patented. Take for example, if you have something like a box gacha. I know no one likes gacha, but just take that as an example. So a box gacha is something where you have a limited amount of items in the box, and every time you pull from it, the number of stuff left in it slowly reduces in number. So this general idea itself cannot be patented. However, you could patent the idea that every time you clear a box, there is a 5% chance that your next box will be a super rare box, for example. And then after you pull specifically 5 boxes without getting it, the 6th box is guaranteed to be a super rare box. If you try to patent everything down the line with all of these steps to a specific end goal, and you specify, like for example, that it has to be 5 boxes and the 6th box has to be the one, and everything down this line very specifically, you have a much higher chance of getting the patent pushed through. And as a result, there is a very real possibility that they might have looked at the patent that Konami had for this system and decided that, yeah, this is something that if we do it in this different way, it would probably not be an issue, especially when you consider some of the other games out there that might be doing the same thing as well and not getting sued by Konami. That said, we don't even know at this point what the patent they are being sued over is just yet, and so I'll probably make an update video when that comes out and we can look at it in even deeper detail. But until then, the only other thing I want to look at right now are some of the speculations that are out there and why they may or may not hold weight, because that is really all we know about the case as of right now. So one thing that many people are out there throwing right now is that it is very similar in the UI, like on Twitter especially, after Cygames put up the notice that they are being sued and they showed the lawsuit itself. Many people are quick to point out, but well, your game kinda does have some UI that's very similar to their game. But, and here's the thing, right? Ever since I heard about this case, I have been pouring through all of the patents on Konami's site, which there's a lot of them. Okay, so obviously it's not really very feasible for me to look through every single patent that Konami has filed in the last 20 years. There's just so many of them considering the fact that they are obtaining and filing more than 100 every single year. But I did look through all of the ones from 2019 to 2017. And from the looks of it right now, and from my own experience, having had to look through this many times in the past for multiple companies, UI is something that tends to not be very easy to patent. In fact, unless it has something that is linked to the gameplay itself very strongly, you probably would not be able to patent the UI itself. In fact, you do see a lot of games out there that do tend to mimic each other's UI, because this is something that tends to be more stylistic, and unless you can get a trademark or copyright for that instead, which is also very rare, you are very unlikely to actually see it being a patent infringement due to the UI itself. So another case that I saw that looked kinda interesting that someone brought up was the case of a similar system with regards to Power Pro, which is a baseball gacha game within Japan made by Konami. So the patent was for something very specific, which is that if you have a game where you raise a specific character using multiple other characters as a support character, and those support characters appear within the main overarching scenario of the main character as a mini character with their own individual stories, that this would be something that will be under the patent itself. And there has been some cases of people pointing this out. This one seems to be a little more legit. However, one thing of note with this is that it will be very weird that the only company getting sued for this is Cygames. That game over there, Shiny Mask by Bandai Namco, actually used a similar system, and you have a much smaller company that made a game that also had a similar system. So the fact that Cygames is the one specifically getting sued for this seems to be a little odd. This is something that only time will tell. But at the current period of time, I find it to be doubtful that this is specifically the system due to the fact that very similar games have this system as well, and those games are not being treated in the same way as this one is. Then another third possibility that was brought up, and this was mentioned in the article as well, is that this might all be due to them actually infringing a patent on the overall system itself instead, where instead of the assistance system with its sub-stories fitting into the main story, that the entire issue with the main story itself and raising a character through that main story might be what had infringed the patent instead. Though I find this to be just as unlikely due to the fact that if this were true, then it leads back to the same question of, well, then why weren't all these other companies implicated as well? You could argue might be something to do with the specificity of the steps involved in the system, because as I mentioned before, the system has to be very specifically modeled in a way in order for it to be something that can be patented. Oh, that was awkward. And so it might be something to do with the way that Cygames specifically implemented those steps that Konami might be trying to fight them on right now as opposed to those other companies. But that is something that we will only see once the actual lawsuit gives us further details in the future. That said, this specific patent that has been brought up in the article has already expired in 2020, so odds are it's also likely not to be this one. But at the very least, right now all we can really say is that it's very hard for us to figure out what patent specifically has been infringed on, and this will be something that will be probably elaborated on as the court case proceeds, because from what we know right now, Cygames is prepared to fight this, and they genuinely do believe, it seems like, that they have not infringed on this patent. And if things go the way they have in previous cases, we might see this becoming a case that might last for a grueling few years, at which point Lord knows what might happen with everything going on later on. Because with the case of Nintendo versus Konami, while the initial lawsuit was for around, I believe, 4 billion yen, or 3 point something billion, in the end, Nintendo actually requested more than double that amount as compensatory damages nearer to the end of the suit, due to the fact that the system in question was not removed from the game. And if Cygames genuinely believes that this system is not an issue and they keep the game running as is, we might see this escalate as the years go by. Although, to be fair, I believe that the Nintendo case, by the very end of it, they were asking for like 9 billion yen, but they only got 3 billion in the settlement. The court of public opinion seems to be on Cygames' side as well right now, with many people slamming on Konami for even invoking a patent infringement in the first place, since it really is something that feels like it would hurt the development of the industry overall. And so while I may not be the biggest fan of Cygames, especially since they have their own very shady practices going on as well, I find myself more on their side in this specific issue, just because I really do not think of patents as something that should be abused in this way in the game industry in particular. And in order to explain what I mean, let's go back to the case of Nintendo versus Konami, because I feel like that case is a very good example of what the problems with these patents in general can be. So in that specific case, Konami was being sued for 5 different cases of patent infringement for the game Shironeko project. One of the big infringements that Nintendo was accusing them of was for imitating the Nintendo DS wrist strap, which apparently was patented as a joystick control system for a touchscreen. So you have to imagine, since we're talking about a physical item being used as part of the control system here, with a touchscreen product, well, then Shironeko must have a very similar system, right? One that is very overly reminiscent of this system that Nintendo is purporting actually existed, right? I mean, I don't actually have the game anymore, since the game has actually changed their control system ever since 2020, but you kind of get the point, right? Like, the game is basically just, you move your hand across the screen like this, and you flick to dodge, tap to attack, and you hold to cast a special skill. That's it. It's nothing all too special. Yeah, that's really all it takes. Like, you have to understand the level of insanity that goes on with this patent lawsuits. Like, this is almost on the level of, like, if Sega were to try to sue 7-Bit Games for making Ace Dance of Fire and Ice just because it's a rhythm game where you push buttons, kind of like Project Diva. You can really see that it would stifle innovation, wouldn't it? For most people who would want to create something new, you kind of have to worry, especially if you're not a company with billions of dollars to spend on lawyers to fight suits, whether or not you would suddenly out of nowhere be sued by a company because they believe that their patent kinda seems similar to what you're doing. And yeah, you can say that in the case of Shironeko, which was made by Konami, it's like both companies were also had their own patents, and like both of them were screwing each other over, so it's like fair enough, haha, to both of them, since it's really just people getting their just desserts. But even then, you have to understand that on a broader perspective, this is something that would hurt the entire industry, just due to the fact that people in most companies would also look at this, like in many of the companies I worked in before as well, people will look at this as some kind of PTSD, where even though they weren't directly involved, it chills innovation to the bone, because people are constantly pouring through patents just to try and hope that they don't tread on anything, which, as you can imagine, it really does affect the industry as a whole. And the thing with most of this is that these patents are patenting something in isolation, like a system in a game overall, and only that specific system on its own is being patented. So without the context of how it relates to the rest of the game, you couldn't really use it anymore without the fear of being sued, which really doesn't make sense if you think about it. Because the same system, if used in a different game, could lead to very different results, right? Like the system of having a deck that you can shuffle in your game, for example, and you draw cards and use that to play, it can really vary a lot depending on the type of game you're playing, be it a trading card game like MTG, or if you're playing a roguelike game like Nadir, where you have a smaller deck and you just pull cards to use to battle, or like Slay the Spire, for example. And so the difference in the implementation of the same system can really lead to many different gameplay experiences, and the fact that these systems in isolation can be patented like this, it really does feel like a very big problem as well. That said, that's all I have to say about this case. What are your opinions on all of this? Do let me know in the comments down below. I'm really interested in this specific case as to what everyone else is feeling about this suit. Right now, there isn't much information out there, so I'll probably do a follow-up video about this in the future. That said, don't expect every video to be me reporting on current events like this. Usually, I just do much weirder stuff instead, since I kinda just want to do stuff that is more interesting to me as well, but it just so happens that this happens to be something interesting to me and affects my job as well, so I figured I may as well give my 2 cents about it. I do apologize if the video seems a little less edited than the usual ones are. This was made in a much shorter time frame than usual, since I kind of want to get this out there while it's still fresh, since this is something that I really want to talk about as well. But yeah, it really seems at this point like this is a lawsuit that might end up taking a few years to resolve. Who knows, we might very well see this resolved after the nuclear holocaust happens, when the world has evolved into a higher plane of fallout existence instead. At this point, with how long most of these cases take, it might very well be a possibility. So yeah, that's all from me for now. Like and subscribe if you were entertained by this video. More to come on this subject as more information comes out. I'll be heading off now, so take care and bye-bye.